So, does a single electron have consciousness? It sounds like a ridiculous question, like asking if a grain of sand gets bored. We think of consciousness as something special. It's the thing that lets you read these words and have thoughts about them. It's the pain of a stubbed toe, the taste of coffee, the feeling of being in love. It's the inner movie that is your life, and we usually think it lives in brains. Complex, wet, biological brains. An electron is none of those things. It's a tiny, fundamental particle. It has a negative charge, a certain mass, a property called spin. It buzzes around the nucleus of an atom. It's a building block of stuff. It doesn't seem to have room for a thought or a feeling. Attributing consciousness to an electron feels like a category error, like asking about the marital status of the number 7. And yet some very serious philosophers and scientists are asking this question. They aren't asking if an electron is thinking about its day or worrying about quantum mechanics. The idea is much more subtle and much more profound. The idea is called panpsychism. Panpsychism is the view that consciousness, in some very basic, primitive form, is a fundamental property of matter. It's not just in brains, it's everywhere. It's in rocks, in water, in air, and yes, in every single electron. This sounds strange, I know. It sounds more like mysticism than science. But the reason this idea has gained traction is not because of a desire to be poetic. It's because the mainstream common sense view of consciousness has a massive gaping hole in it. One a problem so deep that some thinkers believe we need a completely new way of looking at reality to solve it. This is often called the hard problem of consciousness. To understand why anyone would seriously entertain the idea of a conscious electron, we first have to understand this hard problem. What is consciousness, really? There are easy problems and the hard problem. The easy problems aren't actually easy, but scientists feel they are solvable. They involve things like how the brain processes information, how we can focus our attention, how we retrieve memories, how we can tell the difference between a cat and a dog. These are questions about the functions of the brain. We can scan brains, map neural pathways, and build computer models. We're making progress. We can see how certain electrical and chemical signals correspond to certain tasks. But then there's the hard problem. The hard problem is this. Why does all that processing feel like anything from the inside? When you see the color red, your eyes receive light of a certain wavelength. This signal travels down your optic nerve and causes a specific pattern of neurons to fire in your brain. We can track this entire physical process. But why do you have the private, subjective experience of redness? There's nothing in the physics of light waves or the chemistry of neurons that says it has to feel like that. This subjective quality of experience has a name: qualia. The redness of red, the sweetness of sugar, the painfulness of pain. How does the physical stuff of the brain, the neurons, the synapses, the chemicals, give rise to the non-physical world of subjective experience? How do you get mind from meat? Our entire scientific worldview is built on objective, third-person observation. Science describes how things behave, their structure, their relationships. A physicist can tell you everything about the properties of a water molecule. But they can't explain why a collection of those molecules, when organized into a brain, generates the feeling of sadness. There seems to be a leap from the objective, quantitative world of science to the subjective, qualitative world of our own minds. And no one knows how to bridge that gap. This is the chasm that panpsychism tries to cross. The standard materialist view is that consciousness is an emergent property. You take a bunch of non-conscious things, like neurons, and when you arrange them in a sufficiently complex way, consciousness just pops into existence. Or it emerges. This sounds plausible at first. We see emergence everywhere in nature. A single water molecule isn't wet, but a lot of them together are. A single ant isn't very smart, but an ant colony can perform incredibly complex tasks. Wetness and colony intelligence are emergent properties. But consciousness seems different. When water molecules get together, their property of wetness is still about their physical behavior and how they interact with other things. We can explain it in terms of surface tension and molecular forces. It's a story about complex physical behavior. The emergence of consciousness is different. You're not just getting more complex behavior. You're getting a whole new kind of thing, private, subjective experience. It feels like magic. You have a universe of non-conscious bits and pieces, and then you just add complexity, and suddenly, poof! The lights turn on inside. Someone is home. How? Why? At what point did the switch flip? A fish brain? A worm's nervous system? A single-celled organism? The panpsychist looks at this problem of emergence and says, maybe we've got it all wrong. maybe consciousness doesn't magically pop into existence. Maybe it was there all along. Maybe consciousness isn't something that brains produce. Maybe it's something that matter is. This brings us back to the electron. The panpsychist isn't saying an electron has a rich inner life. It's not thinking or feeling in any way we would recognize. The idea is that an electron has a vanishingly simple, primitive form of experience. A kind of proto-consciousness. A tiny flicker of what its likeness. What could it possibly be like to be an electron? We can't know. Our consciousness is a rich tapestry of senses, thoughts, memories, and emotions, all bound together into a unified self. An electron's experience, if it exists, would be unimaginably more basic. Perhaps it's just a single, undifferentiated buzz of existence. A pure, simple point of view without any content. The philosopher Galen Strawson argues for this from the perspective of what matter is. He says that physics is brilliant at telling us what matter does. It describes its behavior, its mathematical structure, its relation to other bits of matter. It gives us a complete blueprint of the universe's causal structure, but it tells us nothing about the intrinsic nature of matter. What is a physical thing when it's not interacting with anything else? What is it in and of itself? Physics is silent on this question. It gives us a perfect, detailed map, but it doesn't tell us what the territory is actually made of. The panpsychist proposes an answer. The intrinsic nature of matter, the stuff that the physical map is describing, is consciousness. So, when we look at a brain, we see the outside story, neurons firing, chemicals flowing. This is the what it does part. But from the inside, that same process is the experience of thinking, feeling, and seeing. The brain isn't a machine that produces a ghost called consciousness. The brain is consciousness, viewed from the outside. The physical processes and the mental experiences are two sides of the same coin. And if this is true for the complex matter of a brain, the principle must hold all the way down. The simple matter of an electron must also have two sides. From the outside, we see its physical properties, charge, mass, spin. But from the inside, it has its own unimaginably simple form of experience, its own intrinsic nature. This view avoids the magical leap of emergence. Consciousness doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's always been there, a fundamental feature of the universe, just like spin or charge. Evolution didn't invent consciousness, it just found ways to bundle these tiny, simple specks of experience into larger, more complex systems. A simple nervous system bundles them into the simple experiences of a worm. A complex brain bundles them into the rich, unified consciousness of a human being. This line of thinking has a certain elegance. It creates a more unified picture of the universe. There aren't two different kinds of stuff, mind and matter, as the dualists believed. And you don't have the spooky problem of mind just appearing from non-mind. You have one kind of stuff, and it has both an outer physical aspect and an inner experiential aspect. But this idea, as elegant as it might be, comes with its own set of gigantic problems. The biggest and most difficult is called the combination problem. If every electron has its own tiny speck of consciousness, how do all those little specks combine to create my consciousness? My mind feels like a single unified thing. I don't feel like a collection of a trillion tiny minds all screaming at once. And I feel like one coherent self, having one coherent experience of the world. How do you get from the simple, separate experiences of countless electrons and quarks in my brain to the single, rich, unified experience of me? This is a profoundly difficult question. It's not like building a wall out of bricks. You can put bricks together to make a wall, and the wall is just a collection of bricks in a certain arrangement. But my consciousness isn't just a collection of tiny consciousnesses, it's a new, higher-level, unified whole. How does that happen? Philosophers have proposed various solutions, but none are very satisfying. Some suggest that when simple minds get into the right kind of system, they somehow merge or fuse into a new, larger mind. But what does that even mean? How do separate points of view literally combine? Others suggest that the little minds don't combine, but instead work together to create a new higher level mind that floats above them, so to speak. But this starts to sound a lot like the old emergence problem all over again. The combination problem is, for many people, the fatal flaw of panpsychism. It's so hard to solve that it might be just as big a mystery as the hard problem it was trying to solve in the first place. You trade one mystery for another. Then there's the question of why. Why would an electron have consciousness? What's it for? In humans, we can see how consciousness might be useful. It helps us navigate complex social situations, make long-term plans, and react flexibly to new challenges. But what could a simple flicker of experience possibly do for an electron if it has no effect on its behavior? If the electron would follow the laws of physics exactly the same way, whether it was conscious or not, then this consciousness seems useless. It's an extra ingredient tacked onto the universe for no reason, and this leads to another issue of falsifiability. A good scientific theory should, in principle, be testable. It should make predictions that we can go out and check. If the theory is wrong, there should be some experiment we could perform that would show it's wrong. But how could we ever test the idea that an electron is conscious? We can't ask it. Its supposed consciousness is, by definition, private and has no observable impact on its behavior. So is panpsychism even a scientific hypothesis, or is it pure metaphysics, a story we tell about the universe that can never be proven or disproven? Many scientists and philosophers argue that it's the latter. They stick with the standard materialist view, even with the hard problem. They believe that one day we will understand how complexity in a brain creates consciousness. They think that calling an electron conscious is a premature surrender. It's giving up on a scientific explanation and replacing it with a philosophical fancy. They argue that our intuition about consciousness being magical or non-physical is just a failure of imagination. We just don't have the right concepts or the right kind of science yet to understand it. Let's think for a moment about the world that panpsychism describes. If it's true, then you are sitting on a chair that is a vast, slow-moving system of experience. The air you are breathing is composed of particles that each have a tiny, primitive point of view. The sun is a raging inferno of simple conscious experience. The whole universe is alive with it. Not alive in the biological sense, but suffused with a kind of raw, elemental feeling. This might seem strange, but it also paints a less alienating picture of our place in the cosmos. We are not conscious anomalies in a dead, mindless universe. We are just a particularly complex and intense expression of what the universe has been at its most basic level all along. Our consciousness connects us directly to the fundamental nature of reality, to the very fabric of the cosmos. So where does this leave us with our electron? We have no evidence that an electron has consciousness. We have no way of testing it. It remains a purely philosophical idea, but it's an idea born out of a genuine, deep puzzle about our own existence. The question, does a single electron have consciousness, is not really about the electron. It's about us. It's a tool for thinking about the nature of mind and its place in the physical world. It forces us to confront the limits of our current scientific understanding. It pushes us to ask, is consciousness a fluke, an accidental byproduct of evolution that happened only on this planet inside our particular kind of brain? Or is it woven into the fabric of reality itself? If you believe consciousness is an emergent property, you have to believe in a kind of miracle. The miracle of something completely new subjective experience arising from things that have absolutely no trace of it. You have to explain how and why that happens. If you believe in panpsychism, you have to believe in a different kind of miracle. The miracle of combination. How trillions of tiny, simple minds can come together to form one large, complex one. You have to explain how that happens. Both positions have deep, perhaps unsolvable problems. There are other options, of course. Some people are dualists, believing mind and matter are truly separate realms. This view has fallen out of favor because it's hard to see how a non-physical mind could interact with a physical brain. How does the ghost pull the levers in the machine? Others are illusionists. They argue that the hard problem is a trick of the mind. Consciousness, as we think of it, like this rich, unified, qualitative inner world, isn't real. It's a kind of user illusion generated by the brain. We think we have this magical inner light, but it's just a story the brain tells itself about its own operations. This view is also hard for many people to accept because consciousness feels like the most real thing in the world. To deny, it seems to deny the very ground of your own existence, so we are left with a choice between deeply puzzling alternatives. The idea of a conscious electron feels more plausible when you see it as the least strange option on a menu of very strange options. It's an attempt to build a coherent picture of the world that doesn't involve spooky emergence or deny the reality of our own minds. It's an idea that asks us to be humble. We humans have a tendency to think we are the center of everything. First, we thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Then we thought humans were a special creation separate from the animals. Science has gradually shown us that we are not so special. Our planet is one of billions. Our species is one branch on a vast tree of life. Perhaps our consciousness is not so special either. Perhaps it's not a unique gift bestowed only upon complex brains. Perhaps it's just a refined, amplified, and highly structured version of a property that has been present in every particle since the Big Bang. So, does a single electron have consciousness? The honest answer is we don't know. And we may never know, but asking the question is important. It cracks open our assumptions about what is and isn't possible. It reminds us that reality might be much stranger and much more wonderful than our common sense tells us. It reminds us that right at the heart of our understanding of the universe, there is a profound and beautiful mystery. The mystery of how a collection of simple physical things like atoms and electrons can come together and from the inside feel like anything at all.